You might have heard about wave overhangs by seeing my post on Reddit, or this segment on the WAN show about it.
Wave overhangs can print, and this is wild, fully horizontal 90-degree overhangs without support material. That's what I looked like.
That's confusing.
And apparently not just Luke was confused, as many of you were asking me for an explanation. You can of course read more about it in the paper we published, or you can just keep watching. Wave overhangs is a method for printing 90-degree or horizontal overhangs without supports, which is typically considered to be impossible. The method is inspired by the work of Steven McCulloch, who came up with arc overhangs, which are featured on CNC Kitchen. Those videos were very popular, but the method never caught on, partly because it was never properly integrated into a slicer, and partly because the overhanging surface would have these deformations at the arc nuclei. The physical principle that this method relies on was actually first shown in a 2019 paper by Fassini et al. Titled Print on Air. Let's say I have this structure here, and I want to print a simple overhang like this. The way your slicer would typically draw the overhanging paths would be to just make the perimeter first, and then fill it with lines with no consideration for the direction of them. If we try to do this, the material would of course collapse. This is why we need support material, so that we have something to build on top of. But if we begin by printing the first overhanging line right next to the supported section, so that it slightly overlaps it, what happens then? The bead sticks to the wall. This is because there are intermolecular forces keeping the droplet attached, and we can call these adhesive forces, as they keep it adhered. And is in principle the same reason why, say, a droplet of water can stay attached to a window without gravity pulling it down. But you can also notice that it stays in a round-ish bead, which is due to the surface tension. Forces on the surface of the liquid trying to keep itself together. We can call these cohesive forces. Finally, if the liquid is viscous or thick, like honey instead of water, the liquid itself is also resisting flow, which further keeps the bead from deforming. We call it viscous shear. These three mechanisms are not enough to keep the semi-liquid filament from staying like that indefinitely though, but they don't have to. The part cooling fan blasts the just deposited material with cold air, quickly solidifying it. So the adhesion, cohesion, and viscosity really only need to resist gravity for a brief instance, until it has bonded with the previous material and solidified. Then you do it again. The next line behaves the same, and again, until the support-free overhang is done. We can also see the sideways deposition in real time. I've attached a microscope camera to this A1 Mini and put on a 0.8mm nozzle so that we can better see what's happening. You can see here how the semi-molten tracks are adhering because they are right next to each other and slightly overlapping. Now in this case, the shape we wanted to fill was very simple, and we could simply keep tracing offsets of the supported geometry outward, and each next line would be adjacent to a previous one. This is actually the method that was described in that paper by Fassini et al. The problem with this approach is that it only worked for simple overhang shapes. But what happens if the shape is concave, so it has this internal corner? If we keep tracing the paths as offsets of the supported geometry, at this corner we get a section that is actually not adjacent to anything, so it will collapse. So this method only works for relatively simple overhang shapes. This is a problem that was solved by Steven McCulloch by tracing the paths as recurring arcs. You start at a point somewhere on the supported edge and make arcs. Each one has a radius slightly larger than the previous. Each line is still adjacent to the previous one. But how does that solve the corner problem? When an arc has grown large enough to just about reach the perimeter, it stops growing, and instead a new arc sprouts from somewhere on the previous one. This rule made it possible to fill any shape with adjacent arcs. However, now there are a lot of arc nuclei all over the surface, which, due to their short length, did not have a lot of time to solidify. These would droop, causing this nippling effect on the surface. So, while arc paths could print way more shapes than simple offset paths, they introduced a new issue with the drooping. I set out to solve this issue, looking for a geometric pattern that could print these overhangs well. After some doodling, I got the idea. What if we model the paths the same way that ripples move through water? This was first described by Huygens in 1690 in Treatise on Light. Huygens stated that a wavefront can be thought of as many point sources, each producing a wavelet that altogether recombine to make the next wavefront. What happens if you trace the paths like that is that once you get to a corner, which is where you would have previously started running into issues with the other two methods, the wave diffracts around the corner. You can then keep recursively propagating these wavefronts to get the rest of the printing paths. So wave overhangs doesn't have the issue where it cannot fill every shape, but it also doesn't have the issue that it produces a lot of really short segments that will droop. Thanks to the diffraction behavior, it can fill really any shape. Even if there's a hole in it, the waves will diffract around that hole. The wave overhangs fulfill the three premises that I would say are required for laterally supported overhangs. Each new track is at a fixed distance to the previous at all points. That's the basic premise. Each track is as long as possible so that the previous track has time to solidify, and it can fill any arbitrary shape. But it's not like horizontal overhangs have now been solved. There are still limitations, of course. I think the most pressing one being warping. I will not go into detail about it in this video as there's a lot to talk about there, but at some amount of overhang distance, warping will become very noticeable. The basic recommendation is to stick with materials that warp less in general, like PLA and carbon fiber reinforced materials like PEGCF. And in terms of slicing, use lower infill. Avoid rectilinear infill. That also includes the floor, for which you can use Hilbert curve floor. We're still trying to understand how all the parameters affect the quality of the overhangs. And you can be part of that. You can be an alpha tester by trying wave overhangs and reporting back your findings. Just download one of the slicer implementations, the PrusaSlicer fork by Steven McCulloch, or the OrcaSlicer fork by Dennis Klappe. You can enable wave overhangs and print something. Then you can submit your result to our community gallery at waveoverhangs.com, where you upload a picture, the G-code, and a quality judgment. The parameters automatically get parsed from the G-code you submitted. This then lets other users see what kind of geometry has worked, what parameters, what materials, etc. And it builds our common understanding of the process. Your findings and contributions can directly help further this new method. If you have any more questions about wave overhangs, put them in the comments, and then I could actually do a Q&A type video to respond to your questions. Also, there will be more videos with updates on the development of wave overhangs, like about warping and the best parameters to use. On a slightly different note, I'm also preparing a video about 5-axis printing and slicing, so if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe. Thank you for watching.